Welcome to the CEN show, a place where we learn from the world community. I'm your host, Rasaki Makani, and this evening our panel is historian Joe Hembrick, Brother Mashinda, and Brother Hood. Tonight, our guest is one of our team members, Dr. Charles Alexander, and the topic is internal displacement and historical trauma. So let's get it going, Dr. Charles. Welcome back. Thanks for coming.
Thank you. And so what I'm gonna do tonight, I've established this timeline that I'm gonna read. It's gonna take me about maybe about 20 minutes to read this timeline, and then we'll use the balance of the time to discuss the timeline and its implications historically and in our contemporary times. First, I want us to have a couple of definitions to kind of work with. Let's see if I can find these. You all see this screen? Can you see the screen?
Yes.
Right? You all were able to see that screen? And can you hear me? I don't know if I'm frozen.
Hello? Dr. Charles, can you hear me?
Were you, when I was showing the screen, were you able to see it?
We could see it. Yeah, we could see it.
Screen that says, can't reach this page. That's all I see.
Yeah. Is that it, Dr. Charles?
I can't.
Well, you got any, Dr. Alexander? I'll be on in a minute.
Bargani.
Dr. Charles? Dr. Charles?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, let me,
Yes.
Brother Hood has to make an announcement. I'm gonna let him do that while you're getting that together. Go ahead, Brother Hood.
Go ahead.
Hey, greetings. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Hey, I appreciate the time. Good to see you, Dr. Charles Alexander. I wanted to share this this survey and a QR code. It's an AI poll. I got a show coming up in January, and I want to do some more research from audience and people who, come through and check out the podcast here. And so anybody you know of, it's just like 6 questions about AI and how it is in your life and how, and it'll help me with some of the research that I'm doing. So I got another presentation coming up and I'm just looking forward to it. And I want to just kind of get community feedback. And that's all it was.
Everybody that's in the chat, and let's make sure we answer those questions.
Yeah, it's totally anonymous too.
Yeah, in preparation for the show in January.
If I may, I could go ahead. You good? All right.
No, go ahead, brother.
Share the questions if you could,
I will
Dr.
share,
Key.
I will share them at the end.
Okay, sounds great, man. Appreciate it.
All right.
Brother Robert, should I go ahead?
We're ready.
All right. All right. I wasn't able to pull up for whatever reason. I was trying to show you something online, but can you now see the timeline, a historical trauma timeline of Africa and Palestine?
Yes.
All right. So I'm going to read this, but what I wanted to share with you was just a couple of terms that we're hearing, in the media now. So we're hearing refugee, we're hearing internally displaced, and just wanted to make sure that we're clear what those things mean. So refugees are displaced persons that cross international boundaries, and the internally displaced are folks who are um, forced to leave wherever they live, but they remain inside their boundaries, inside the international boundary. And the internally displaced are often people who uh, who are victims of forced migration, or again forced displacement. And so as I read the this timeline, I want you to kind of be thinking about some of these terms. They're not going to necessarily appear in the timeline, but I do want you to be thinking about them because they will probably come up in the context of our subsequent discussion. So just kind of follow along, take notes, and when we get to the discussion part, we can go back to any point of the timeline for context. So let us begin. 3100 BC, ancient Egyptian kingdom was established. 3000 to 1250 BCE, the Bronze Age. Canaanite city-states under the rule of the ancient Egyptian empire. The emergence of urban life and the establishment of the first fortified cities under the Egyptian rule. Canaanites, a group of Semitic people, settled in Palestine, Canaan, and along the Syro-Palestinian coast. 1675 BCE, the Hyksos invasions. That's the invasion of Egypt. 1250 to 721 BCE is the Iron Age. Regional kingdoms. Massive population migrations led to the establishment of regional kingdoms in Palestine. The Phoenicians, descendants and heirs of the Canaanites, who were seafarers and founded from their city-states along the Syro-Palestinian coast, maritime colonies along the southern shores of the Mediterranean basin. The Philistines, after whom Palestine was named, migrated from the Mediterranean basin, established a confederation of city-states along the southern coast of Palestine, and manufactured iron arms and tools. The Hebrews are Israelites, a semi-nomadic Semitic people settled in the central mountains of Palestine. They were culturally influenced by the Canaanites and were in conflict with the Philistines. 1070 BC to 350 AD, Kingdom of Cush was established. 671 BC, Assyrians invade Egypt. 525 BC, Persians invade Egypt. 332 BC, Macedonians invade Egypt. 30 BC, Egypt becomes a province of the Roman Empire. 4th century BC through the 7th century AD, the kingdom of Axum was established. 721 to 332 BC, Mesopotamian hegemony. Palestine was brought under Mesopotamian hegemony. It was conquered in 721 BCE by the Assyrians and in 586 BC by the Babylonians, who exiled much of the population. During this time, the name Palestine, in the form of Plistu, deriving from the Philistines, appeared for the first time in Assyrian documents. 642 AD, the Arabs conquered Egypt. 6th century through the 13th century, Ghana Empire was established. 332 to 63 BC is the Hellenistic period. Alexander the Great conquered Palestine in 332, bringing it under the influence of Hellenistic culture, which impacted all aspects of life, art, and architecture, philosophy, and religion. After Alexander's death, his Middle East empire was divided between two of his generals, Syria and Palestine under Seleucids, and Egypt under the Ptolemies. Jews led by the Maccabees revolted against the enforced Hellenization, and an independent Hasmonean kingdom was established in 129 BCE. The Hasmoneans forcibly converted the Idumeans, early Arabs of southern Palestine, to Judaism. 63 BCE to 325 CE is the Roman period. Following the conquest of Palestine by the Romans in 63 BCE, a process of Romanization began, the establishment of cities, Roman in character such as Jerusalem, Caesarea, Sabbativa, Basian, and a vassal king, Herod the Great, an Idumean Arab by origin, was appointed ruler of Judea in 37 BCE. During this time, the ethnic make of the country included Jews, Sumerians, Idumeans, Nubian Arabs, Greeks, and Phoenicians. The birth of Jesus Christ and the spread of Christianity based on his teachings and the writings of the New Testament. Two major Jewish revolts against the Romans were suppressed. One in 70 CE led to the destruction of the Jewish temple in Jerusalem. The second, the Bar Kokhba revolt in 135 CE, led to the razing of Jerusalem to the ground and the building of a Roman colony, Aelia Capitolina, in its place. 325 to 640 is the Byzantine period. Palestine came under the rule of the Byzantine Empire. Emperor Constantine legitimized Christianity and declared it the official religion of the state. Palestine gradually became Christianized. Many churches and monasteries were built over the country at traditional sites associated with the life of Christ. Among these, the Church of the Resurrection in Jerusalem and the Church of Nativity in Bethlehem. An influx of pilgrims visited the holy sites. 640 to 1099, early Islamic period. Muslim Arabs conquered Palestine from Byzantines and consequently Arabized and Islamized the local population. The Umayyads in Damascus, 661 to 750, transformed Jerusalem, which became the third holiest Islamic city, and built the Haram al-Sharif, including the Dome of the Rock and the Aqsa Mosque. They built Ramallah as the capital of Palestine. Under Abbasids in Baghdad, 750 to 969, the Fatimids in Cairo, 969 to 1073, and the Seljuks in Damascus, 1073 to 1098, Palestine continued to flourish, and Jerusalem was a center for Islamic pilgrimage and learning. 1099 to 1291 is the Crusader period. The Crusaders, Franks, conquered Palestine in 1099, followed by a process of colonization. Jerusalem was sacked and its population massacred. The Latin Kingdom of Jerusalem was established along with military orders to protect it. The Franks established many cities, rural settlements, castles, churches, monasteries, and industrial installations. (1187 to 1250), Ayyubid period. The Ayyubids, following their predecessors, The Sanjids waged a holy war against the Crusader states in the Levant. The Levant is that area that constitutes what we refer to as the Middle East. After Salah al-Din defeated the Crusaders at the Battle of Hittin in 1187, Saladin rediscovered Palestine and Jerusalem, recovered Palestine and Jerusalem, restored and consecrated Islamic holy sites in Jerusalem, and a revival of Islamic art and architecture. Jerusalem was surrendered to the Crusaders by Al-Kamil in a peace treaty in 1229. It was recaptured by the Khwarizmians in 1244. 1230 to 1600, the Mali Empire was established. 1260 to 1517 is the Mamluk period. The Mamluks overthrew the Ayyubids and ruled Palestine from Cairo. In 1260, they defeated the Mongols at the decisive battle of Ain Jalut near Nazareth. By the time of the Babar's death in 1277, he had recaptured most of Palestine from the Crusaders. The Mamluks were great patrons of the arts and sponsored a large number of religious and secular buildings constructed in a distinctive style. They also established an extensive network of khans and postal stations linked by a network of roads and bridges. Jerusalem was further confirmed as a center of Muslim pilgrimage and learning. 1415, the Portuguese conquer Ceuta in North Africa. It is the first European foothold in Africa. 15th century to the 16th century, the Songhai Empire was established. 1501, Spanish monarchs Ferdinand and Isabel penned a communication to Nicolas Obando, allowing black slaves of African descent to be imported to Hispaniola, present-day Dominican Republic and Haiti, September 16, 1501. 1516 to 1917, the Ottoman period. The Ottoman Turkish Sultan Selim I conquered Palestine in 1516 and incorporated it into the Ottoman Empire. Under Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, an extensive program of works was carried out, including rebuilding of walls of Jerusalem and the restoration of the Dome of the Rock and the Aqsa Mosque. Palestine was divided by the Ottomans into districts, sanctuaries of Jerusalem, Nablus, and Acre. Heavy taxation and repressive measures by the Ottoman authorities led to several revolts, with local leaders declaring autonomous rule, such as Zar al-Umar in northern Palestine, with his capital in Acre. 1517, the Turks conquered Egypt. 1518, Fernando and Isabel's grandson, Emperor Charles V, abolished the provision requiring slaves to be born under Christian dominion and issued a charter allowing 4,000 Africans to be purchased directly from Portuguese traders in Cape Verde Islands and transported to the New World. The first slave ships presently known to have sailed with captives directly from Africa to the Americas embarked from Cape Verde Islands and Sao Tome, arriving in Hispaniola, Puerto Rico, and Cuba during the mid-1520s. In 1562, England joins the slave trade. John Hawkins was England's first slave trader. In 1562, he sailed from the Barbican in Plymouth with 3 ships and violently kidnapped about 400 Africans in Guinea, later trading them in the West Indies. 1564, the Songhai Empire in West Africa destroys the Empire of Mali. 1575, the Portuguese began to settle in Angola. 1581, the Moroccans began to expand across the Sahara. 1590, the Moroccans captured Timbuktu. 1591, the Moroccans destroyed the Empire of Songhai. 1619, 20-eyed Negroes arrive off the coast of Virginia, where they are brought for victual by labor-hungry English colonists. 1652, the Dutch found a colony in South Africa. 1700, the rise of the Ashanti Kingdom in West Africa. 1787, the British found a colony for freed slaves in Sierra Leone. 1792, Denmark bans the slave trade. 1799, Napoleon offers Palestine as a homeland to Jews. 1801, the French military invasion of Egypt and Palestine, led by Napoleon, was repelled at Acre by Ahmad Pasha al-Jazar. Muhammad Ali declared independence in Egypt and occupied Palestine 1831 to 1840. Jaffa developed into the most important port in Palestine. 1806, the Dutch colony in South Africa becomes a British colony. 1807, the Sierra Leone and Gambia become British Crown colonies. Britain bans the slave trade. 1808, the U.S. bans the transatlantic slave trade. 1822, the USA founds a colony for free slaves in Liberia. And Rishon LeZion, a major Zionist settlement, is established in Palestine. 1828, Shaka, king of the Zulus, is assassinated. 1830, the French invade Algeria. Over the following years, the French build up an empire in North Africa. 1847, Liberia becomes independent. 1855, David Livingstone discovers the Victoria Falls. 1858, John Speke discovers Lake Victoria. 1859 to 1869, the Suez Canal is built in Egypt. 1879, the Zulus defeat the British at Isanlawa, but they are defeated at Ulundi. 1880 to 1881, war between the British and the Boers, Dutch-speaking farmers in South Africa. In 1882, the British Army occupies Egypt and Sudan. In 1884, the Berlin Conference, in which leaders of 14 European countries and the United States came together to discuss the control of Africa's resources, known as, again, the Berlin Conference. They sought to discuss the partitioning of Africa, establishing rules to amicably divide resources among the Western countries at the expense of the African people. Of these 14 nations at the Berlin Conference, France, Germany, Great Britain, and Portugal were the major players. Notably missing were any representatives from Africa. Also in 1884, the Germans take Namibia, Tanzania, and Togo and Cameroon. The Mahdi leads an anti-British uprising in the Sudan. 1885, the term Zionism, first coined by the Viennese writer Nathan Birnbaum. Also in 85, Italy takes Eritrea, Belgium takes the Republic of Congo, and Britain takes Botswana. The Mahdi captures Khartoum and the British General Gordon is killed. 1886, Kenya becomes a British colony. Gold is discovered in Transvaal. Transvaal is South Africa. 1888, 1889, the British take control of Rhodesia, Zimbabwe. 1894, the British take Uganda. 1896, Theodore Herzl, founder of the Zionist movement, calls for the restoration of the Jewish state. The Italians invade Ethiopia but are defeated by the Ethiopians. 1897, First Zionist Congress takes place in Basel, Switzerland, and the first Zionist organization is founded. 1898, the British defeat the Sudanese at the Battle of Omdurman. 1907, Zionist leader Chaim Weizmann visits Palestine. 1908, first Palestinian anti-Zionist weekly newspaper is published by Arab Christian Najib Nassar. 1910, the Union of South Africa becomes independent from Britain. 1912, Italy conquers Libya. 1915, British cabinet member Herbert Samuel calls for the British annexation of Palestine in a memorandum, The Future of Palestine. 1916, European powers conclude secret Sykes-Picot Agreement, dividing future spheres of influence in the Ottoman Empire territories. 1917, the Balfour Declaration promises a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. 1919, Amir Faisal presents a memorandum to the Paris Peace Conference outlining the case for independence of Arab countries. 1922, the League of Nations grants mandate over former Ottoman territory Palestine to the UK, i.e. Britain. Provisions include terms of the Balfour Declaration, including a Jewish national home. 1933, Palestinians riot amid sudden rise in Jewish immigration from Nazi persecution in Germany. 1935 to 1936, Italy conquers Ethiopia. 1936 and 1939, Palestinian rebellion against the British mandate in the Jewish immigration. 1937, UK Peel Commission report publicly recognizes conflicts irreconcilable terms and recommends partitioning of Palestine. 1939, UK issues a white paper limiting Jewish immigration. 1941, the British drive the Italians out of Ethiopia. 1942, the British defeat the Germans and Italians at Al Mian in Egypt. U.S. Zionists meet in New York and adopt the Biltmore Program, calling for establishment of Palestine as a Jewish Commonwealth and for unlimited immigration. 1943, German and Italian forces in North Africa surrender. 1947, in February, the UK proposes to relinquish its mandatory role and places the question of Palestine before the UN. In September, the UN Special Committee on Palestine uses a report to the General Assembly, or issues a report to the General Assembly with plans for partition for the federal state of Palestine. In November, the UN General Assembly adopts Resolution 181, which called to divide Palestine into an unnamed Jewish state and an unnamed Arab state with Jerusalem under trusteeship. December 31st, 1947, the first large attack by the Hangzana Zionist militia took place against the village of Balad al-Sheikh, east of the port city of Haifa, in which 67 Palestinians were killed. 1948, apartheid is introduced in South Africa. February 15th, a Palma force raided the village of Sasa and detonated explosives inside several homes, destroying 10 houses and killing tens, according to the estimates. The New York Times reported at the time that 11 people were killed, 5 of them children, and 14 houses destroyed. April 9th, 1948, more than 110 Palestinian men, women, and children were slaughtered in one of the most heinous crimes carried out by the Zionist forces. The massacre took place in a once prosperous village of Dar Yassin on the western outskirts of Jerusalem. May 15, 1948, marked the end of the British Mandate, which occurred 1922 to 1948, and the beginning of Israel as an independent Jewish state. Palestinian Muslim and Christian Arabs consider this day the El Nakba, pronounced An-Nakba, the catastrophe, whereby they were dispossessed from their homes, lands, and livelihoods as a result of Israeli ethnic cleansing operations during the Arab-Israeli War between November 1947 and July 1949. July 9, 1948, Zionist forces launched a large-scale military operation known as Operation Dani, which aimed to occupy the cities of Lydia and Ramla. Between July 9th and 13th, militias killed dozens of Palestinians, perhaps as many as 200, according to the Salman Abu Sida Atlas of Palestine. A citywide massacre led to the Death March, or mass expulsion of Palestinians. Israeli militias expelled between 60,000 and 70,000 inhabitants of the two towns and refugees from nearby villages under direct orders from Yitzhak Rabin, who was at the time Director of Operations for Operation Dani, with David Ben-Gurion's agreement. David Ben-Gurion was the prime minister at the time. October 30th, 1948, a massacre was perpetrated by the Shiva, or the 7th Brigade of the Israeli Army. According to various accounts, including by the Haganah National Staff, Israel's Galilee, to Israeli historian Benny Morris, troops entered the village and blew up a structure believed to have housed a mosque, killing 60 to 94 people who had taken refuge inside. 1949, February to July 1949, Israel signs armistice agreement with Egypt, Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria. May 1949, United Nations adopts Resolution 273, admitting Israel as a UN member. December 1949, the UN establishes the United Nations Relief and Work Agency for Palestine refugees in the Near East to replace the United Nations Relief for Palestine refugees. By 1949, about 500 Palestinian villages, towns, and tribes were depopulated and destroyed, and approximately 711,000 Palestinian refugees, according to the UN, were dispossessed. In 1950, Israel moves its capital from Tel Aviv to the western part of Jerusalem in defiance of the UN resolution, and the West Bank is brought formally under Jordanian control. 1951, Libya becomes independent. 1952 to 55, the Mau Mau uprising in Kenya takes place. 1956, Morocco and Sudan become independent. So does Tunisia. Oil is discovered in Nigeria. 1957, Ghana becomes independent. 1960, Senegal becomes independent, and the Sharpeville massacre in South Africa occurs. 1962, Uganda becomes independent. So does Algeria. 1963, Kenya becomes independent. 1964, Zambia and Malawi become independent, and the state of Tanzania is formed. Palestine Liberation Organization is founded in Cairo. 1965, Gambia becomes independent. 1966, Botswana becomes independent. In 1967, diamonds are discovered in Botswana, and the Six-Day War occurs. Israel occupies the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, Gaza, Golan Heights, and the Sinai Peninsula. And in 1967 and 1970, the Civil War occurs in Nigeria. And so that gets us from the beginning, what we consider the beginning of history, all the way to the Israel occupation of Palestine. And within that, I would like for us to kind of talk about concepts of trauma and what types of things were you hearing in the context of the timeline? What types of things came to mind for you in the context of the timeline?
That was pretty extensive. That was, I mean, that's a very good breakdown. And yeah, I would like to know what people think about it. And I definitely, with all that was going on, who wouldn't be traumatized by all the pillaging and killing and the taking over and the force movements, all of that. I'm gonna start off with I guess I'm start off with Brother DX. Brother DX.
Greetings.
Greetings, brother.
Yeah, I appreciate you today. That is a very extensive history lesson in a nutshell. Like how you went through that and the presentation is man, it's commendable. Thank you so much. I
Thank
guess
you,
for
brother.
me, yes, sir. I guess for me, what mostly comes to mind is like the perspective that we have been taught over the years, how you know, for most of the part, like the Europeans were able to populate the planet through slavery, and I think that's the biggest myth ever. You know, some of the dates that you mentioned, when they first started, you know, uh the transatlantic slave trade and this and that, it didn't seem like there were millions of slaves being moved around, maybe thousands, but not millions, because they fighting wars at the same time. And it's like, who were they really fighting the wars against if they was trying to uh transport people? And then different islands like the, Caribbeans and different places, the Arawaks in Jamaica. It's like it's people already there. And I think for our history here on this continent, um, I think like a little bit more extensive research on w- w- the the people that was here already before Christopher Columbus. Like, I know Ivan Van Sertima and a few others had they came before Columbus, and some other ones when they talked about, some of the native tribes and, us being here. And I just think that that awareness, like this is our land, and like that, just like they invaded everywhere else and colonized all these other continents. Like, we get credit for building pyramids, but not for having ships and traveling and coming across waters, like Mansa Musa and his brothers and some of the other people that you mentioned, they're not in our history at all. So thank you.
No, thank you, brother. And and that was kind of the the motivation for trying to put all of this stuff that is occurring, all of these things that are occurring, you know, concurrently. Because when we're taught history, typically, if we're taught it at all, it's like this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. When in many instances, most of these things are happening at the same time. And so, again, like to your point, while there's all of this unrest, also kind of probably fomented by Europeans and others. Mansa Musa is crossing. He's crossing the Atlantic before uh before his Abu Bakr is crossing the Atlantic before the uh before the British or the Spaniards or the Portuguese. They're still just trying to navigate the Mediterranean, and are considering even exploring Africa, while the Africans on the West Coast are already having contact in what those folks coined the New World. So yes, brother, that is exactly what this is intended to do, is to have people think about all of these things occurring simultaneously.
Thank you. Thank you.
Right. Thanks a lot, Brother DA. Brother Mashenda?
Yes, sir. Yeah, I just pulled in, so I was driving, listening. Couldn't take no many notes driving, but of course, showing my appreciation the work presented tonight. The timeline is pretty extensive, as you said. So it's kind of it's not only interesting, it's kind of it's a lot of information, and you say this is what's left out, this is like world history that, our kids on the average, they don't learn unless, they have somebody like Dr. Alexander, and, presenting it to his children or his nephews or nieces, or bringing it to the podcast so we can introduce it to our, people that we deal with on a daily basis. But, each year, each time, each piece on the timeline, although it's like a brief synopsis of what was going on, each era is full of rich information. So like I say, I look forward to going down this timeline again when I get time, so I can and explore some of these time zones, these time frames more in depth. I've studied some things, and but anyway, I just want to show my appreciation, because it's a lot. So this is not to end tonight. This is something that provokes thought and discussion, and of course, this is worth sharing. And I appreciate it. So something that I could share with others immediately. So and begin discussion on keeping the discussion going. Anyway, thank you, brother, doctor.
Thank you, brother. And again, the point is just made, like each, these points, they represent, some significant, occurrences. And again, within the context, if we're thinking about, so let's say Kemet or Egypt, we don't typically think about trauma and forced migration, right? And so I just had the benefit of spending about 5 7 days in Kemet, and to be able to go to the pyramids and go to the temples, and and you wonder, like, how is it, because if you go to Egypt now, at least to lower Egypt, it's in Cairo, all you're going to see is Arabs. But if you go to upper Egypt, then you see the Nubians. And so you kind of baffle, and you're like, if we were able to do all of this, how is it that the that the Arabs are now in control? Well, let's look at the timeline. And so, you know, Dr. Ben says the rush for Africa didn't start with the Berlin Conference. He says the rush for Africa started with the Hyksos invasion in 1675 BC. And then when we get down to 670 or 671 BC, we see a series of invasions. The Assyrians in 671, Persians in 525, the Macedonians in 332, and the Roman Empire in 30 BC. And it's that constant pressure. Those are first of all, there's conflict, right? So we know that that's trauma. But that just constant conflict and that constant pressure uh, from the north and the east, we started to retreat back into the interior, and that in part is what's responsible for the reemergence and the rise of the Kush Empire and Aksum, and then in ancient Ghana, because of that constant pressure from the Arab world and uh, and and the north, the other parts of the Mediterranean. And so that's where we start to see, for the ancient Egyptians, we start to see that again, that external pressure, the conflict, and the forced migration. So thank you, brother.
All right. Thanks a lot, Brother Hembrick.
Yes, sir. Hey, brother Alexander.
Sir.
Uh, long. What is the title of this talk tonight?
Go ahead and read that.
Internal displacement and historical trauma.
Okay. But the time, Egypt is There's a whole lot before that. As far as, empires and whatnot goes, uh, I will admit that when certain invaders came in or stuff was happening, the people just migrated, to the east and away from the conflict. A lot of them did that. Definitely when the Arabs, the rise of Arabism and Islam, you know, well, actually they had a slave trade going on there. You mentioned
Absolutely.
the name Muhammad Ali, he's the biggest slave trader on the east coast of Africa. And
Absolutely.
what was that? Zanzibar. So, there's quite a few things going on before you get to ancient Egypt. It said that Egypt is Ethiopia's eldest daughter, and then even before Ethiopia, with the Twa people and all of that, and they're, venturing around the world. Uh, I kind of got a little, trying to follow the reading. It was it was long. But anyway, I just wanted to point that out because the ancient Kushite Empire had a lot going on. And, with the domestication of the elephant, the changing of the Nile, and all of that. And then the god system coming in from those that were along the Nile, Canoe, Ptah, and all that kind of stuff going on. But with the Arab, probably the first significant, well, the Hyskers, the Shepherd Kings is what they were called. I don't know how detrimental they were to people migrating away from it. I don't think they occupied that much of a territory. They were especially up in what you call Lower Egypt, which is really up north.
Mm-hmm. They're in the Nile Delta. Correct.
So, but with the Arab influx and the Syrian folks, they really put it on the folks and really started that migration to the east, to the west side of Africa. Like with Tariq, Tariq's grandmother saw it, saw the wave coming, and she raised him as a Muslim, but they weren't Muslim. We talk about Europeans and Christians and what they did to the people on the continent. The Arabs and Islam is just as guilty, and they still got it going on to this day.
Absolutely.
So, I just want to add those points into the discussion. Also, you were talking about the 40s, 1940s, with there was an African Holocaust off the west coast of Africa in Shark Island by the Germans. It was years before they did it to the European Jews. And we were mentioning on the show last night with Brother Jabal was talking about some things about what happened in the Holocaust and whatnot. Well, they just weren't killing Jews; they were killing a lot of Africans and a lot of homosexuals. They killed millions of them too, which is rarely mentioned when you talk about the so-called Jewish Holocaust. Anyway, I just want to add my 2 cents.
No, brother, that was actually more than 2 cents because again, what he's saying is what we don't often think about. Like, there's part of the reason why we have high culture on the West Coast is because there was constant pressure from the East, so there was forced migration, and so we come back, we migrate down the Nile, from from Nubia, from from Ethiopia, down the Nile, develop high culture, and then we just have successive waves of invasions that eventually pushes back into the interior. And so again, then you have the reemergence of the high cultures of Kush, and then you have Aksum, and then you have Ghana, and then you have, more pressure from the Arabs and from the north
And let me,
that starts to move us across. And so that's that internal displacement. That's that trauma that we were experiencing before the Ma'afa. And so many of us believe that everything was was stable, but everything wasn't stable. There's always, to your point, there's already an Arab slave trade that was, a great harvest upon, our personal resources and whatever other resources we had otherwise.
let me,
So those start to move us across to the West Coast. Go ahead, brother.
let me at this point. I know you're talking about Massey Musa and selling to the Western Hemisphere. Uh, but even before that, those early Africans that ventured around the world, because we were the first people everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Before the so-called Native Americans and the societies that they had built that the Europeans ended up destroying. They were tearing it down brick by brick, just like they did in Carthage. Uh, so and also down in southern or down the Nile, like a lot of people don't know, there were like 90 some pyramids that were built as you went up the Nile. It just wasn't the large ones that you see in Egypt. There's 90 something, and some in America. They weren't made out of stone. Forget those hills they call in like the Midwest. It's a range of mountains. I have a book called America BC that was written by this Harvard professor who was fired for writing it. And he talks about what they had here in America, what they call mounds. You ever hear of the mounds before? They're
Yep.
made in wood. They're just not out of stone. But the same concept that was here in what we call the United States of America.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, that's it.
Thank you, brother.
Dr. P.
All right. Professor Rock.
Bonnie Gunny, Dr. Alexander, it's good to
Bye, brother.
When you said the trauma, was this to focus on how people became how so-called Jews got to Palestine, or was this about ancient a chronology of ancient history?
It's about it's all of it. And so it's looking at the chronology of ancient history to also help people to reconcile what we're being told about the Jews and subsequently the Israel and the state of Israel relative to the Palestinians. Now, if we look at this timeline, there is no time, there's no time in the past 3,000 years that the Jews had any control over Palestine. There was always a power other than the Jews that were in Palestine, starting with the first major power that ruled over that area was Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's to be able to put those things into context, and it's also to put into context that we too, as I was just saying to the brother before, that we were experiencing um, those external pressures also, which caused our forced migration and started to push us, to back into the interior, back into Central Africa, and and then also all the way to the west. But we see over time that there's pressure from everywhere. There's pressure from there's pressure from the east. There's pressure from the north, and really there's pressure from eventually those from the north start coming down the coast, the west coast, and they go all the way around, and then they're down in South Africa, and so there's pressure points from all over that we were vulnerable to, that most people don't understand. And so they don't understand the forced migration and the internal displacement that we were experiencing even before the transatlantic trade starts.
Mm. Yeah,
And
but
so
see,
go ahead.
the thing is that when you begin to look at the terms and the names and all that, because like the Jew in Israel today was not the Jew back in them days,
Correct.
And the same thing with most of those. I like to go to prehistory and bring it up. A lot of people start in ancient history because there's so much information, writings and this and that and this and that. But signs and symbols of pre-mortal man and John G. Jackson's book, Africa, the civilization, the origin of African civilization. And then, John Chancellor Williams' book, The Destruction of Black Civilization. See, I have to rely on my Black researchers. I can't, because the European tells the story in his way, and he put like Jesus was born. Well, there's a question: was there ever a Jesus? He stays away from the Dark Ages. He stays away from the. And I see your references, and they are Black. From the standpoint of that, and that's about the Palestinian history, chronology, and African. See, because the word African. Some credited with Romans, some Romans, some equated with the origin with Leo F. Canuffs, and all that stuff. But I like the information that really should encourage you to do more research. Who reads it? And yes. Seek out other understanding, or either verify those understandings, because a lot of the names, like the term slave, did it come from Slavic state?
Slavic.
Yeah. Did it just mean like they said, Greeks and Romans and all of that? I mean, was there a different type of slavery among Africans? Like, it wasn't chattel slavery. It wasn't slavery for life. It was
not chattel slavery, correct?
And it wasn't brutal slavery from that standpoint until they started getting into ancient history and started selling them. But before that, we used to say we're going to slave, just mean a worker. You understand? Some people volunteered to work because that's how they, fed their families and built empires in major states, working with those deities who, like the pyramids. You understand? Thousands of people worked on the pyramids, at least a lot of hundreds. And they call them the mystery system because nobody know how they build them. I just look at Caucasians as from the Caucasoid Mountains, and albinos, as Dr. Francis Cress Wilson talk about, and the same thing with Diop in his book, African Civilization. He talks about how the Asians have different slanted eyes, and the monsoon wind that got into it and then became a mutation and all that type of stuff. So, I like. I mean, I'm really impressed with the timeline and the information, and but at the same time, I have to, you know, because I taught in African civilization, and even Dr. Ben criticized the Europeans' writing of history because they change it and put it in their image. You know, like they brought civilizations to the Africans rather than the Africans influencing them. And even in John M. Beatty's book, African Religion and Philosophy, he starts out with almost prehistory. He goes into a whole bunch of stuff. And so, but at the same time, I just think that that should be added because it shows that the Africans introduced civilization and most of these people modeled their civilizations after Africans, minus the violence and the corruption and the you know the sexism and raping and you know because these people were cave people, they're straight out the cave, you know, ice age and all of that, but and then they want to act like they were civilized. And they ain't even civilized today. Look what they're doing to the Palestinians. You know,
And that is essentially the point, is that
yeah, go ahead.
there's a historical context to that. And so they would have us to believe that what we're seeing from the Israelis is in response to October 7th, when in reality, this is this from Europe, this is what you get. You get that level of aggression, period. And so we know that they are not the people who allegedly left. This is you know, and so that's the whole thing, is that folks don't understand the Zionist movement. People equate Zionism with the Hebrews, and Zionism is a European concept. It is an aspect of white supremacy.
Yeah, but you know, you got Christian churches called Little Zion and Zion this and Zion that. So you're correct about that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, you know, I try to look at religion, organized religion, as just gang warfare, secret societies that you know want to dominate, and if you weren't in their religion, you were a heathen or something like that, you know, and then they make up stuff, you know, everybody knows the as Jabal was saying the other day, the biblical text that they refer to was made up. And you mentioned it in the Nicene Conference, in the partitioning of Africa. How you gonna be religious and you partition in somebody else's land? You know, talking about God gave it to you.
Under the guise and auspices of civilizing us, when we are the ones who gave civilization to the world.
Yeah, that's it. But we have to go all the way back to prehistory, because they started out with small families and built communities, and then they grew and grew and grew. And then they began to travel and take those societies to different ways and migration. You know the story. You got it right here about the various groups that migrated and went over here and went over there, and they brought their culture with them. You know, and then the European came and imposed his culture. That's what Joe was talking about. Arabs. What is an Arab? An Arab is just an African, according to Diop, African and is an Asian and an African that mix. You know, and in Palestine today, the only white people is Israel. In that area. They're the only white people. Why in the hell you say this is God gave you this, and them people been living there for thousands of years, And here you
Correct.
come talking about some biblical story that God gave you this, you know, and then
It's,
kill everybody there and move them out and put, you know the story, Doc.
yes, sir. And
Yeah.
that was a part. So that was a part of this too, is to be able to show both our experience and the experience that was going on in Palestine
Mm.
simultaneously, and to be able to lay out pretty clearly that there was no time where these folks, these Israeli folks who are generally Europeans, there is no ancient, there is no ancient, uh, nation state for them. There is no point in time in which they were preeminent in that space. There was always another dominant power. And again, that dominant power started with Egypt. And then you have all of these, subsequent, entities that come into that place. And it isn't until we get to World War One and the demise of the Ottoman Empire and the decisions for France and Britain to assist the Zionists in being able to, claim, claim Palestine. But even with that, there's a whole history behind that suggests that the reason why Britain even got involved and why some of the other European states as well as, or European nations as well as the United States even got involved because first, well, they didn't want the Jewish people in Europe. And so this was a way to get it done and it not look like anti-Semitism. It was a way to get it done that makes it look like that they were doing good on behalf of the Jews, when in reality they was doing it in part for the same reason that Hitler was killing them, because they didn't want them there. And so, in the course of this research, like Balfour in particular, in the Balfour Accord, where Balfour is saying that he's going to help, that he's for a Jewish state. I've come to find out that he was one of the most anti-Semitic people in Britain and in the Britain cabinet, no less. And so the thing is to put all of this stuff kind of out and then have people look at it. We toss it around, and then this, or different parts of this or all of it or what have you becomes points that encourage people to study other things
Yeah.
and even study it, look at this and say, well, I don't know about this. Well, check it
Well,
out.
they call you anti-Semitic if you put this information out and try to put it in context, because it don't put them first and it don't put them as the chosen people. But what I'm
Yep.
trying to get to is that this mentality that that we are going through, watching what's happening over there in Palestine right now, the genocide that's going on, and the European that's in power with weapons and stuff, not with wisdom and knowledge and caring and love and appreciation of humanity, but just with weapons, trying to dominate for resources. It's amazing how they can get and alter your intelligence by giving you their story of how life began and what the world was about. And they like they were angels and still angels. Like they'll say the captives in Palestine, or the captives Hamas got, they kidnap, but the captives Israel gets are hostages. I mean, no, the captives that Hamas got, they'll say that they were kidnapped.
Yeah,
But
so Hamas kidnaps people and Israel arrests people. And so what Israel is illegal.
You got listen. It's like we went to
Yeah.
Africa to get slaves. No, you went to Africa to get Africans, and you brought them over here and made them enslaved.
Correct.
You know, but some people think slavery, the word slave mean black people, you know, and it don't, you know, and the COVID thing is, as I conclude, is that as Jabal said the other night, they're trying to turn Judaism into an ethnic group, and it's not. It's a religion.
It is a religion.
That's all it is, a made-up religion. You know, and people think that they're an ethnic group. That's why they say you're anti-Semitic, not anti-Jew. You know, because they're trying to claim an ethnicity. You know, but it's a struggle, man. But this is a beautiful presentation. I really enjoyed listening. All right.
Thank you, Bob.
Mhm.
Thank you for the comments.
Yeah.
So, Dr. Charles,
Yes.
so the kind of touch on the historical trauma part.
Mm-hmm. You're asking me to, or you have a question about it?
No, I want you to kind of just briefly touch on
Yeah,
Define it, explain it.
so the historical trauma is, again, so if we look at, so let's if we start at the Egypt, if we start at Egypt, so what we're looking at is, that first invasion that is disruptive. It's not the end, but it is disruptive. And so an invasion in and of itself is, has, I mean, it's war, it's conflict. So it is necessarily traumatic. And so from that point, for literally the next 1,000 years, there's an onslaught from external forces uh, that are creating constant pressure on the ancient Egyptians. That that is the historic trauma. That's where our trauma doesn't start with the transatlantic slave trade. Our trauma starts with the constant pressure from Europeans and Arabs coming to the continent in search of whatever they're searching for.
Okay.
And so that starts with the Hyksos, and then then you have these other Eurasian groups. Then you have the Syrians, the Persians, and then you have people from in the Mediterranean, in terms of the Macedonians and the Romans and the Greeks. All of that is a constant. Those are the constant pressures, the presence and pressures that initiate the internal displacement and forced migrations and start to push us first south, then west. First south, then central, then west. And those, and then when the air pressure intensifies, you start to see, and this is really what the destruction of Black civilization is about. Chancellor Williams' book is about that dislocation, and then the assault on our cultural forms, and the pressure that resulted in us turning to Islam first, so that we could be able to remain viable in trade, with the hopes that in just doing that, we would still be able to maintain some of our own cultural continuity, only to find that there, there was no way that those things could really coexist, to our benefit. And so there just started to be a distortion. And then that's how we then, even in the context of that domestic, what became, the Arab slave trade, then kind of turned into a domestic slave trade, when, just as Ra is saying, is that, you know, our system of servitude prior to these various incursions was either because of debt, you know, may have been some internal war over land or resources, or some people literally sold themselves into those situations because they couldn't support themselves. But regardless of how you got into it, there was no chattel system, you know, on the continent. And so many of us, before we came here, you know, are, you know, come from traumatized people. And part of that is even what made some of us vulnerable to end up over here. Because by the time that the transatlantic slave trade starts, you know, and as I was, you know, just trying to show all of these things going on at the same time, you see pressure from the north, you see pressure from the east, you see pressure from the south. All of that is all of that is evidence of our historical trauma.
Okay, so question for you. Okay, Henry, real quick, I want to ask this question, but go ahead, Henry, because I want to ask a question, and maybe all three of you guys, or DX and Machinda, could touch on it. But go ahead, Henry.
I'm gonna throw out another perspective on the trauma, and want us to look at this from a geographical standpoint and a power standpoint. Now, you know, we talk about transatlantic slave trade, but my thing is, you look at the Arabs and what they did, what they still control today. They control North Africa, East Africa, and West Africa.
Mm-hmm.
And those areas that they're in today, which were African colonies, such as Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, Iraq, all those areas there were African colonies.
Mm-hmm.
Who controls it now, and what kind of resources are they getting from those lands to make themselves like Saudi Arabia and the wealth that they have? You follow what I'm saying? And so I think they've been more detrimental because when they came in and they started bastardizing the people, you know, they would use the offspring to help them go get captives.
Yes.
Man. And that's what ran, and a lot of black people don't know that. And people talking about
Well, that's what's going on in the Sudan right now, brother. You are absolutely correct.
people talking about that's the true black man's religion. They don't know what they're talking about. They definitely don't know the history about it, or they wouldn't say that. And I remember what the brother that got assassinated in Egypt, what was his name, Ra?
Anwar Sadat.
Anwar Sadat. When he got voted in, I never forget what he said. He said, "I'm the first true pharaoh in the last 2,000 years," because he was black. And those pharaohs, they have done more, I think, than the European myself. So I just want to throw that perspective out there to see what people thought about that. If you look at the East, the North, and the West, it's mostly dominated by Muslim forces. So just want to throw that perspective out there.
And that's an important perspective. And that perspective, and again, so when I say the origins of our trauma, that's really because even if you've had the chance to go to Cape Coast Elmina, they have a whole, well, I'm sure it looks different now because I haven't been there since 97. But when I went, they have a whole in the Elmina Castle, they have a whole display speaking about the Arab slave trade and the fact that the Arab slave trade really has never stopped and has taken hundreds of thousands more Africans off the continent. And even those that they haven't taken off the continent, they still, you know, have in servitude. And people don't understand it as such. And when you go to Egypt, you probably fly into Cairo, and you moving around Cairo, and you'll see a whole lot of folks who look like you because it's all Arabs in Cairo, and uh, and they move like they're responsible for the tourism. They're the beneficiaries of, really they're the beneficiaries. They won the spoils of the war. They're the beneficiaries of conquest. They are not the creators of the art, but since they've laid claim to it, they are the ones that benefit. And and it's really just a crazy kind of experience. And so I was fortunate enough that my tour guide is actually a Nubian, and he's an archaeologist, and he is pro-black, and he's a Pan-Africanist, and he's like, when you go back, you got to make sure your people are studying so that folks can't tell them that all of this was created by aliens or Arabs, because that's what people are learning. And and he's very adamant. He said there's nothing that you need to see in Lower Egypt. He said whatever it is you need to learn is in Upper Egypt. And he wanted to take us down to the border, so just like northern Sudan, but it wasn't enough of us who wanted to make the trip, because he's like, there's so much more. Because, brother, I think he was mentioning about the number of pyramids down there, down, in Aswan and below. He's like, there's so much more to see. We don't have enough time, but I can try to fit this in, but we need X number of folks to do it. And so this is what folks have to know. But if you don't understand, like my favorite book is The Destruction of Black Civilization. I think Chancellor Williams' book is super duper awesome. It's an awesome read. And I also suggest to you, if you've already read it, to get the audio book and then listen to the audio book. It'll just make whatever you read just that much more rich. And then you go back and you read more, and you read along with the audio book. It's just awesome. But he never speaks about trauma. But that book is about this. It is about how we got from, East Central and Northeast Africa to the West Coast. And the way that we got there was because of that constant pressure. And most of that pressure is from the Arab culture. And that's where you get that internal displacement and slavery and all those other things, and the disrespect of the indigenous cultural and cultural systems. And but he speaks to all of those things and in the destruction of Black civilization, but he just doesn't use the term trauma.
Let me just interject one more point. That's all right, Rocket Steve. And with all of those 90-some pyramids, a lot of people don't know the ones that stole all the stuff out of there was mostly the Arabs. And people talk about Tut. Tut was really a insignificant pharaoh. He's just a teenager, just a boy. And the only thing that makes him important is that the stuff that they didn't steal. They found that. But those Arabs ransacked those pyramids long ago. And even today, the people I know that visit the Nile Valley, especially Egypt lately, is those Arabs are chiseling out the truth of a lot of the temples and stuff. Like the what's that temple? The Temple of Isis and other temples along the Nile, where they're chiseling the truth out of the stone. They're doing that right now. All right.
As much as you are correct.
Yeah.
Anyway, appreciate you, brother. I'm through.
Thank you.
It's so much. Chancellor said he went to Europe. He said he studied 30-some years. He said the first place he went to study Black history was Europe. And they said, why'd you go there? He said, because they stole everything and it was in their museums. He went blind writing his books. And I think he had one, Birth of Africa or something like that, and the destruction. Conrad World gave me that book. You know, you remember Dr. Conrad World, and he's a professor. He was a professor at the University of Chicago or something, and he was also over the Black United Front for a little while. Yeah, and so, but he passed, made it good. He brought in the world last forever. But he said, brother, you need to read this, because I was at that time dating his niece, and we was at dinner and a family thing, and he found out I was a professor and head of Black Studies. And he's the one that gave me that book, Destruction of Black Civilization. And the issue is that there's so much. It's like what Ivan Van Sertima said once at a conference. He said, we people have forgotten more than we will ever learn. Something like that. But he was just trying to tell you how the vast information about African people and their origins and their development. But Chancellor was criticized for his book because he didn't put references in it. And the reason he didn't, because he was going blind and he wanted to get the book out. But at the same time, Dr. Ben and John Henry Clark and Ivan Van Sertima and John G. Jackson became the hallmark of Black history. From that standpoint, and then now Molefe Asante is putting out books after books. He's a chair of Black. He was a chair. I don't know if he got it back. Of Black State. He was trying to become the librarian for the what is that? The Schomburg in New York.
Schomburg?
Yeah, he applied for that, but he didn't get it. Me and him, we know each other very well. But the point is that there's so much information that we must begin to dig up. But the purpose of it is to make us stronger, to inspire us to struggle, and to get that trauma up off of us. The trauma, it comes from our lack of knowledge.
That's part of it.
And oppression. Oppression. Like what person a Black man walking around that don't have high blood pressure or don't feel trauma is in America, something wrong with it. You understand? Because we have that. It's, the trauma comes from the interaction with the European of the third kind, where we actually touched and mixed and got together. And that's why Chancellor Williams said, Africa turned from black to brown to white, black to brown to white, and miscegenation, as Joe would say, using their white women and things of that nature to as a weapon. They weaponized the women and had kids and things of that nature. But, there's so much. The more you look, you get like Carter G. Woodson. You just get hooked on it when you start getting the history. You get addicted to getting all that information.
But and so like when you mentioned Carter G, it's like this period that we're in now makes it very clear to me that people have no idea what Carter G. Woodson was doing. It doesn't make sense to me that people are having a response to what. So to this guy down in Florida, right, DeSantis. Now, folks in Missouri, I'm from St. Louis, and so I can have a conversation with folks in St. Louis who would say that DeSantis is crazy because, he's he's trying to keep us from learning Black history. The state of Missouri bans more books than anybody in the nation. So why are they worried about DeSantis, right? But the whole point is that this isn't new. Why do we know it's not new? Because that's why we even know who Carter G. Woodson was. This whole goal was to make sure that we was learning, because even then we weren't learning, and we act like that there was this time where we were learning. And really, it's been a struggle for us to get history, as long as we've been able to legally learn that our history has always been compromised. And so, but that too, to your point, that oppression and the lack of knowledge that comes from the oppression is also a part of the trauma, to your point. And if you don't know that you're being subjected to this, then yes, it compromises you physically as well. So yes, we part of the reason why we're walking around with high blood pressure is because of social stress, which comes from being oppressed. But we have to be able to look at all of this in this broader, kind of historical context, because that too, so we had this thing, epigenetics. Some of this stuff is literally in our genes now, because this has been a 3,000-year process. And we have to understand it as such.
Well, you can see the trauma in households. A lot of noise, a lot of screaming at each other, cussing at each other. Oh, that's from trauma. Not seeing each other as gods and goddesses, and loving and peace among ourselves. I mean, shooting, gang warfare. All that's from trauma, and you being using them as a model to emulate, because that's where your mentality of violence come from. I mean, that's what H. Rap said. Even Martin Luther King said, America is the biggest purveyors of violence in the world. And you look at what they're doing to the Palestinians. This is Biden. He swear he's a Christian. Biden said he's a Catholic, or he want to get.
He said in his heart he's a Zionist. He said in his heart he's a Zionist.
Yeah.
But we don't know what Zionism means, and so that again, but
yeah, when you name your church after it, when you Little Zion, Big Zion, all that,
that is a part of the psychic trauma, and so that's the point of the whole piece, is to kind of get these things lined up, so we start to look at these things as simultaneous occurrences, as co-occurring things, in which in some places we had agency and in some places we did not. But it's very easy to see over time that white supremacy, Arab supremacy, or what have you, has taken quite a toll on our well-being historically and contemporarily.
All right, Brother Joe.
I know I told untruth. I said I was through. Not saying this. So, how do we recover from all of this? And from what I've studied and what the ancients have said to pass down to us is, what we need to do is seek truth, knowledge, and become one with nature, which we were talking about last night. Seek truth and knowledge, which will get all of that stress off of you when we wake up and find out what we're really about, and then can all that other stuff and get at one with nature. Good night.
Hey,
and find like-minded people. Find these types of conversations. This is healthy.
I was just gonna say that this is very therapeutic, learning history and all of the information that we bring here. It's just, I mean, I'm in hog heaven.
Yeah, well, you're gonna have to confront this guy, because you can be all the nature you want, and we were at one time. And he came and took our land, killed us because we were peaceful, and we loving, we was caring. We didn't even think about ruling the world. We just wanted to live on it. You understand? This man wants to rule the world and enslave everybody and take all the resources for himself. And he's not going to stop until somebody put him in check. So confrontation is going to have to come. You understand? The Palestinians have been fighting him for 75 years. You understand? Throwing rocks. They don't even got nothing, you know. And the only time we've ever gained social recognition, appreciation, and results is when we struggle. You understand? If it wasn't for the Watts Rebellion, New Jersey Rebellion, Detroit Rebellion, you wouldn't have had all those jobs and opening up because all the companies were discriminating. You understand? All of them were. All the unions were brought in to kick us out of jobs. You understand? Keep us from getting jobs. You understand? But struggle, open up opportunity. And I ain't just saying you got to go get guns and shoot white people, but you got to be able to defend yourself and confront them in an intellectual, cultural, and physical way. You understand? Because if you don't, I mean, you know, somebody got to put them in check. That's all. That's all. You don't, they're going to keep on going. That's all they do is build weapons. That's all they do. While we're building pyramids, they building weapons. While we're building farms and growing food, they building weapons. They got weapon factories everywhere. That's all Israel is. A damn weapon depot for the Middle East and their resources. That's why they support them so much. It's just another state. It's just like Texas. You understand? That's why America said we with you no matter what. In life form. You know, talking about they what were they saying we found weapons. We have a blackout. You can't get no news out of here unless we prove it. And ain't no white country criticizing them, talking about democracy. And one of the first things in the Constitution is freedom of the press. And Israel won't let nothing out. You understand? I mean, hey, brother, and then they tell you what happened. We found some guns. Where are they? Well, we will show you later.
Dr. Charles.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know his screen had went. Now, this has been beautiful. I want to commend Dr. Charles for putting in that work. That was some work. I took time. That was a study he just did. And
Yeah, it's a PhD.
that's just we need to have much gratitude for people like Dr. Charles, and we have gratitude for everybody that come on here and everybody that's a part of the team. So I just appreciate Dr. Charles and all of his hard work. Brother Hood came on earlier, and I want to share the screen so anybody can get this QR code by just putting your phone up there. And I'm just going to share it because Brother Hood want us to answer. I already answered the questions. I already did it. And he want us to answer these questions in preparation for his show in January. So let me share that code. And this is for anybody. So you just put you get your phone and you go to the camera. And when you put the camera and you show it to this QR code right here, you're gonna see a little thing slide on your screen, and you hit it, and that's the survey right there.
Okay.
Anybody can do that, and I just want everybody to do that when they get a chance. Or Professor Rod, you guys can do it now if you want to. Brother DX, you could do it now if you can.
Let me get my thing together.
Yeah, you just got to go to your camera and just put it up to this QR code here, and it'll send the survey right to you on your phone.
You have to take a picture of it?
No, you just you just hold your phone up to the screen right now with the camera. You go to your camera and hold it up there, and it's gonna go right to your phone, a survey.
Nothing's happening.
Huh?
I got it. I'm holding it up there. Nothing's happening.
You ain't got it like
Look here, all this technology. AI, the only
Right
AI
here.
is Allen Iverson. That's the only AI.
See, look.
I'll call Hood and get it done personally.
Okay, yeah, it's I see my camera's right here. I hit camera and I just put it up. I just flash it to that thing, and I got a blue. It says "Go to," and it's right there. I can't really show it all that well, but yeah, it's really easy, but it's okay. But anybody that view this show, they can just put it up to the screen. You did it, Rob? Dr. Charles is back.
Yeah, I think I got it.
You got that little blue? And you just hit that and you just answer those questions. So everybody, Dr. Charles, you back, huh? Can you hear me? So now on next Wednesday, we have Brother Messiah coming back, and he's going to do probably, because he didn't get back with me, he said he'd probably do part 2 of Who's Pulling the Strings. And I'll show you that last video we did with him. And it's right here. That was 4 months ago. And he'll be back on next week. Real good show. Like a young brother he does a lot of studying and research. Professor Rob, what we have for Monday?
I don't know. I'll call you.
Okay. Well, I appreciate it, Dr. Charles, and talk to you soon. Thanks again. And Brother Charles?
Thank you all. Great conversation.
Oh man, I just appreciate all that good work you put in, man. That's excellent.
Yeah, it's excellent. The research.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, brothers.
And you put it in a language we can understand, as Malcolm said. Yeah.
So we're gonna sign off. We're gonna take our calls. Each one teach one in Conscious Corner. Have a good evening.